The auction square was alive with noise. Voices shouted from every corner, deep growls and high-pitched tones mixing into a chaotic market song. Traders argued over prices, guards barked orders, and the auctioneer's hammer struck against metal. With each sale, the air smelled of smoke, sweat, and fear. Cages lined the platform, each holding figures who once had names, families, and homes. Now they were only lots. They stood with heads bowed, some trembling, some silent, waiting to see who would buy them. One by one the slaves were dragged out, displayed under bright lamps, and sold to whoever raised the highest credit stick. The buyers laughed and bargained with cruelty. They inspected teeth, muscles, and scars as if examining livestock. The unlucky were dragged away by chains, disappearing into the shadows of their new masters. When the auctioneer announced the final lot, the crowd's excitement dulled. Guards pulled out a small figure, thin and frail, her body wrapped in worn rags. She stumbled when pushed, her knees buckling under the bright light. The alien girl stood there, shaking, her large, dark eyes staring at the crowd without hope. Her species had long been considered low value, too weak for heavy labor, too soft for combat, too fragile for entertainment. No one wanted them unless they were desperate. The auctioneer tried to raise her value with words. Lot 47. A young female of the Karen species. Healthy lungs, quick reflexes. She can serve in kitchens, light work, obedient by nature. His voice carried energy, but the buyers only shifted uncomfortably. No one raised their hand. Opening bid, 50 credits, he called. Silence. The auctioneer laughed nervously. 40 credits then. A strong hand for a low price. Still nothing. The girl looked at the ground. She had expected this. She had seen it happen before. Sometimes the unwanted were sold for scraps. Sometimes they were thrown away. Her heart sank, but there was no energy left to cry. The auctioneer's smile began to crack. 30 credit, he shouted, voice higher now. 30. Anyone? A murmur ran through the crowd. One alien leaned toward another and muttered, useless, not worth feeding. Another laughed, shaking his head. The girl swayed, her thin arms hanging limp at her sides. The collar around her neck felt heavier than ever. She wondered if this would be the day she simply vanished, discarded like waste no one claimed. And then, I'll take her. The words were simple, quiet, but they cut through the noise like a blade. Every head turned toward the speaker. The back of the crowd stood a human. He was not tall compared to many of the towering species around him, but there was a weight to his presence. His posture was relaxed, yet his eyes were sharp, focused on the girl as if he saw something the others could not. He wore plain travel gear, nothing expensive, but he carried himself with the ease of someone who had no fear. The crowd broke into whispers. A human. Here. Buying? Humans were known across the sectors for many things. Curiosity, stubbornness, and above all, their strange tendency to interfere. Some called them reckless, others called them brave. But one fact was certain. Humans did not buy slaves. More often, they broke chains rather than placed them. The auctioneer blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Sir, did you say? I said I'll take her, the human repeated, his voice calm, his gaze never leaving the girl. The alien bidders chuckled among themselves. Foolish human, one muttered, throwing money away. But the auctioneer, relieved to finally have an offer, nodded quickly. Very well, sold to the human for 30 credits. He struck the hammer down. The sound echoed across the platform, final and absolute. The girl barely reacted. Her mind was numb, too heavy with confusion. Bought? By a human? What did that mean? Was he crueler than the others or simply stranger? Guards pushed her forward, handing over the control stick for her collar. The auctioneer plastered on a smile and presented it to the human. Your property, sir. Do treat it well. The human took the control stick without a word. He looked at it, then at the thin figure trembling before him. Slowly, he crouched down so that he was at her eye level. Up close, the girl could see his face, lined with wear but not unkind. His eyes were steady, not sharp with hunger or cruelty like the buyer's before. He reached forward, and she flinched, expecting pain. But instead he pressed a button. With a sharp click, the collar around. Her neck unlocked and slid off, falling into the dust. The girl froze. Her hands touched her bare neck in disbelief. "You're free," the human said simply. The crowd gasped. Some laughed at the absurdity. Others shook their heads, muttering about wasted credits. But the human stood calmly, as if he had done nothing strange at all. The girl stared at him, eyes wide. She wanted to speak but found no words. No one had ever removed a collar like that. No one had ever bought her only to let her go. "Come," the human said, standing and turning toward the edge of the market. "You don't have to stay here." The girl hesitated. Her legs trembled, her body weak, but some force pulled her after him. She stepped away from the platform, away from the cages, away from the hammer and the laughter. The collar lay in the dust behind her, a forgotten piece of metal. For the first time in her life, she walked without it, and though fear still clung to her heart, something else stirred too. Something small, fragile, but alive. Hope. The girl followed the human through the busy market streets. She walked slowly, her weak legs stumbling at times, but she forced herself to keep moving. The human did not pull her or push her. He simply walked ahead at a steady pace, glancing back every now and then to see if she was keeping up. The noise of the auction still echoed in her ears. She could almost hear the laughter, the jeering voices, the sound of the collar unlocking. Her neck felt strange without it, too light, too bare. Every step she took felt unreal, as if she might wake up and find herself still on the platform, still waiting for someone to decide her fate. Finally, they reached the edge of the marketplace where the crowd thinned. Strange neon signs glowed above food stalls and the smell of spiced meat drifted through the air. The human stopped near one of the stalls and turned to her. "You look like you haven't eaten properly in days," he said in a calm voice. "Hungry?" The girl froze. No one had ever asked her that before. Hunger had always been something she endured in silence, not something anyone cared about. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She only nodded, a tiny movement. The human smiled slightly, then ordered food from the vendor. Moments later, he handed her a steaming bowl filled with broth and soft bread. She stared at it. The warmth of the bowl in her hands was almost too much to believe. Her body shook as she lifted a piece of bread, sniffed it, and finally took a bite. The flavor flooded her mouth, rich and comforting. She ate quickly, almost desperately, afraid someone might snatch it away. "Slow down," the human said gently. "It won't vanish." She tried, but her hand still trembled as she ate. Tears pricked her eyes, though she didn't understand why. The human ate as well, quietly, giving her space. When she finished, she sat still, holding the empty bowl, tightly as if it were treasure. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then she finally spoke, her voice hoarse. Why did you buy me?" The human looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Because no one else did," he said simply. She frowned. That answer made no sense. "Then, why free me?" "You wasted credits," he shrugged. "Credits are just numbers. A life is more than that." The girl blinked at him. She had never heard words like those before. In the markets, in the cages, she had always been told the opposite, that lives were worth less than credits, that she was worth nothing at all. The human leaned back, folding his arms. "What's your name?" She hesitated. It had been so long since anyone asked. Her name had been used as a curse, as a joke, but not as a name. She whispered it. "Rin." "Rin," the human repeated, nodding. "I'm Elias." The sound of her name spoken without cruelty startled her. It sounded different on his tongue, gentle and steady. For the first time in years, she felt like a person. "Listen, Rin," Elias said, lowering his voice. "You're not going back there. Not to cages, not to collars. You're free now. Do you understand?" Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him, but the word free felt dangerous, too bright to touch. Freedom was a story slaves told each other in the dark to comfort themselves, not something real. Seeing her hesitation, Elias softened his tone. It's not easy to trust, I know, but you'll see. They left the food stall and walked further through streets filled with blinking lights and alien voices. Rin stayed close, her eyes darting nervously at every shadow. She expected slavers to appear at any moment to drag her back, but Elias walked calmly as if nothing could touch him. They reached a quiet docking bay where a small ship rested. It was simple, patched in places, but it looked sturdy. Elias pressed a button and the ramp lowered with a hiss. "This is mine," he said, "and until you decide otherwise, it's yours too." Rin stepped cautiously onto the ramp. Her heart pounded. She had never set foot on a ship as anything but cargo. Now she was invited inside. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal, but it felt warmer than any place she had known. Elias showed her a small cabin with a narrow bed, clean sheets, and a soft light. "You can sleep here," he said. "It's not much, but it's yours." She stared at the bed. She had slept on stone floors in cages, in corners of dirty pens, but never in a real bed. Slowly, as if afraid it would disappear, she sat down. The mattress gave on. The ship lifted from the dusty port with a low rumble. Rin sat in the co-pilot's seat, her thin hands gripping the edges tightly. She had never been this close to the controls before. Usually she had been locked in the cargo hold with others, hearing only the distant roar of engines. Now she was in the front, watching stars slide past the glass as they entered the void of space. Elias sat beside her, relaxed, his hands moving across the controls with practiced ease. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, scanning every light and gauge. He seemed comfortable in the pilot's chair, as if the ship was an extension of him. "First time seeing open space?" he asked. Rin nodded, unable to pull her gaze away from the stars. They stretched endlessly, bright points against a black sea. For the first time she realized how vast the galaxy truly was. Her own world, her own pain, felt so small compared to it. Elias chuckled softly. "It never gets old. Out there no one owns the stars. Not yet anyway." She turned her head slightly, studying him. His words were strange, filled with quiet defiance. Other species often spoke of ownership, territories, dominions, control. But Elias spoke of freedom, of space belonging to no one. As days passed, Rin began to learn how different humans were. Elias treated her with a casual respect that confused her. He gave her choices: what to eat, when to rest, whether to sit in the cockpit or not. At first she froze every time he asked her opinion, expecting a trick. Slowly she realized he meant it. One evening, he handed her a small data pad. "Here, learn how the ship works. I'll teach you to read the systems." She blinked, clutching the pad. "Teach me? Why not?" Elias shrugged. "You've got sharp eyes. Might as well use them." Rin hesitated. No one had ever cared what she could learn. Knowledge was wasted on slaves. Yet here Elias was, calmly expecting her to try. The lessons were simple at first. What the blinking lights meant, how to check fuel levels, how to open the cargo bay. His explanations were clear, his tone patient. Whenever she made mistakes, he only corrected her, never raised his voice. Over time, her fear began to loosen. She found herself asking questions, pointing at symbols, trying to understand. And every time she asked, Elias answered. It felt strange, powerful even, to learn something new without punishment. One night, as the ship drifted in quiet space, Rin sat at the controls while Elias leaned back, arms crossed. "Go on," he said. "Take her for a spin." Her eyes widened. I can't." "You can," he replied firmly. "I'll guide you. Trust yourself." Her hands shook as she touched the controls. Slowly, carefully, she pressed the levers, and the ship tilted, slightly. Stars shifted on the screen. A thrill shot through her chest. She had moved it. She, Rin, who had once been nothing more than a number on an auction block, had flown a ship. Elias grinned at her reaction. Not bad. You'll get the hang of it. That night, when she lay in her cabin, she whispered the moment to herself like a secret. I flew a ship. But not everything was easy. The galaxy outside was still cruel. On a trade station, when Elias took her with him to buy supplies, other aliens stared. Some muttered, pointing at the faint scars of the collar still visible on her neck. Rin's stomach twisted. She lowered, her head expecting insults or worse. But Elias walked beside her without hesitation, meeting every stare with steady eyes. His presence was like a shield, daring anyone to speak. No one did. Later, when they were back aboard, she asked quietly, "Why do you not care what they say?" Elias leaned against the wall, thoughtful. Because their opinion doesn't matter. What matters is that you walk free, that you learn to hold your head high. She frowned. But I am nothing special. He looked at her seriously. That's not true. You survived. That makes you strong. Don't forget it. His words settled deep inside her. Strong. The word felt heavy but warm. No one had ever called her that before. Over time, Rin began to notice more about humans. They were different from many species she had seen in chains. Other races often bowed under the weight of cruelty, but humans, they resisted, they fought. They believed in freedom with a stubborn fire that frightened slavers and inspired the enslaved. She began to wonder if that was why Elias had freed her, not just because he pitied her, but because it was simply what humans did. One evening, while they shared a simple meal, Rin asked softly, "Elias, why do humans hate chains so much?" He thought for a moment, chewing slowly before answering. "Because once, long ago, we wore them too, and we swore never again." Rin tilted her head. Curious. "You mean your people were slaves?" "Yes," he said quietly. "For centuries. On our own world, humans enslaved each other. But we broke free. And when we reached the stars, we carried that memory with us. Some call it a weakness, but I say it's our strength. We know what it means to be caged, and we refuse to let it happen again." His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with an old fire. Rin shivered, not with fear, but with awe. She realized that Elias was not just one man making a strange choice. He was part of something larger, a history, a people who carried defiance in their blood. That night, as she looked out at the stars through the viewport, Rin touched her bare neck where the collar had once been. For the first time, she wondered not just if she was free, but what she might do with that freedom. Maybe, she thought, humans did not just break chains. Maybe they taught others how to break them too. The station was loud with voices, engines, and flashing signs. Elias and Rin stepped off the ship together, walking side by side into the crowded corridors. Rin's eyes darted nervously, but her steps were firmer now. She was no longer the trembling figure from the auction. Still, the stares followed them. Traders paused mid-bargain. Dock workers whispered behind their hands. It was not Elias who caught their eyes, but Rin. Her scars, her too thin frame, and the faint marks of the collar told her story. Everyone could see what she had once been. But what shocked them more was the way she walked now. Free, unchained, beside a human who treated her as an equal. It was a sight that unsettled many. As they entered a supply shop, the owner, a stout alien with gray scales, frowned. "You bring a slave here, human?" Rin froze, shame flooding her chest. But before she could lower her head, Elias spoke, his voice sharp but calm. "She's no slave. She's free." The shopkeeper's eyes narrowed. "Free?" he scoffed. "Her kind? Worthless without a chain." Elias leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "Say that again and you'll regret it." The shopkeeper blinked, startled by the intensity in Elias's eyes. He muttered something under his breath and turned away, deciding it was wiser not to argue. Rin stood frozen, her heart pounding. Elias hadn't hesitated to defend her. Not once. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at an insult meant for her and thrown it back like fire. When they left the shop, she whispered, You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Elias replied simply. "No one talks down to you, not while I'm here." His words burned in her chest, not with pain, but with warmth. She didn't know how to answer, so she stayed quiet. But word of the moment spread faster than she could imagine. By the next day, whispers moved through the station. A human defended a slave girl. A human freed her. She walks without chains. Other freed workers and slaves in hiding began to take notice. When Rin passed through the corridors, she saw them, staring not with disgust but with a strange kind of hope. Their eyes followed her as if searching for proof that the rumors were true. One evening, a small group approached. They were different species, their clothes patched, their bodies marked by years of labor. A tall, thin alien with pale skin stepped forward and bowed slightly to Elias. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice low. "Did you free her?" Elias crossed his arms. "Yes, and she's not the only one I'd free if I could." The group exchanged glances, murmurs rising among them. Rin's stomach nodded. She had never been the center of such attention. Another voice, trembling but hopeful, asked, "Will you help us too?" Rin looked at Elias, unsure what he would say. His expression was serious, his eyes sharp. "I can't promise to save everyone," Elias said, "but I can promise this. Humans don't stand by while chains are locked. If you want freedom, start by believing you deserve it." The words hit Rin harder than anyone else. She realized Elias wasn't just talking to the group, he was talking to her too. Later, when they returned to the ship, she sat quietly, deep in thought. For so long, she had believed her life was worthless, that her species was weak. Yet Elias's words had spread like sparks, lighting a fire in others. Could it be true? Could one act of defiance start something greater? That night, her answer came sooner than expected. A group of slavers spotted her in the docking bay. Their eyes lit with recognition, and they moved closer, smirking. One of them spoke with cruel amusement. "Look here, a runaway. Someone forgot to put the chain back on." Rin's chest tightened, fear gripping her. The memories of collars, cages, and auctions rushed back. She took a step back, her breath shaking, but Elias stepped forward, placing himself between her and the slavers. His voice was cold, steady. "She's not a runaway. She's free. Touch her, and you answer to me." The slavers laughed at first. They were larger, stronger, armed. But when Elias's hand rested on the weapon at his side, his eyes hard as steel, their laughter faltered. There was something dangerous about humans, something more than muscle or weapons. It was the way they stood, the way they refused to bend. The slavers saw it in Elias's stance. The station was restless. Rumors spread faster than the ship's docking in its bays. Traders whispered in taverns, guards exchanged uneasy looks, and slaves dared to speak in hushed tones. All of it was because of one simple act. A human had freed a girl no one wanted. Elias didn't care for the rumors. He went about his work calmly, buying supplies, repairing his ship, and planning the next route. But Rin noticed the stares. Wherever they walked, eyes followed them, not with hatred this time, but with quiet hunger. She heard it in the murmurs, when they passed groups of workers. "That's her, the freed one." And sometimes, "The human did it. Maybe he can help us too." At first, Rin felt uncomfortable. She had never been noticed before, except as property. Now she was something else entirely, though she didn't understand what. One evening, as they sat in the ship's small galley, she finally asked Elias, "Why do they look at me like that?" Elias set down his cup and leaned back. "Because you're proof." "Proof?" He nodded. "Proof that chains can be broken. Proof that even those thought worthless can walk free. The galaxy doesn't need speeches, Rin. It needs examples, and right now, you're one of them." Her chest tightened. She had never wanted to be an example. She had only wanted to survive. But she saw truth in his words. The truth became clearer the next day. A small group of slaves, different species, all thin and tired, approached her in a quiet corner of the station. They glanced nervously at the guards, then at her. One of them, a broad-shouldered alien with rough skin, whispered, "Is it true? Did the human free you?" Rin hesitated, then nodded. The group exchanged hopeful looks. "Then maybe he can help us," another said. "Maybe we can be free too." Rin's heart raced. For the first time, others were looking to her for hope. She wanted to say yes, wanted to promise them freedom, but she didn't know how. She looked at Elias, who stood nearby, watching quietly. He stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "I can't free all of you alone, but I can fight, and I can teach you how to stand." The group listened, eyes wide. Elias's words carried a weight, a fire that seemed to pass from him into them. That night, Rin lay awake thinking. Elias was right. He couldn't free everyone, but something had already begun. His defiance had spread, and others were ready to believe. The spark was catching. The next day, the spark turned into a flame. In the central market, a young slave collapsed under the weight of crates. His master shouted and raised a hand to strike him. But before the blow could fall, another worker stepped forward. Then another. They blocked the master, shaking with fear, but refusing to move aside. A crowd gathered. Some laughed, expecting the workers to be beaten down. But then Elias appeared, stepping into the circle. "Put the boy down," he said. The master sneered. "Stay out of this, human. This is mine." Elias's eyes were cold, steady. Not anymore. For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was sharp, the crowd holding its breath. Then, slowly, the master lowered his hand. He shoved past the workers and stormed away. The boy was lifted gently by the others, and the crowd erupted, not in laughter this time, but in whispers of awe. He stood against a master, and the workers followed. Did you see? Even the human was not afraid. Rin's heart pounded as she watched. She realized something powerful had just happened. It wasn't only Elias anymore. Others had found courage in his presence. For the first time, they had stood together. Later, when they returned to the ship, Rin turned to Elias. "They listened to you. They followed." He shook his head. "No, they listened to themselves. I only reminded them they could." Rin was silent, thinking. Slowly, she began to see the truth. Humans were not special because of strength or weapons. They were special because they carried defiance like fire, and that fire could spread to others. Days passed, and the whispers turned into talk. Talk became planning. Small groups of slaves began meeting in hidden corners, sharing hopes they had never dared speak. Some wanted to flee, others wanted to resist, but all of them carried a new thought. Freedom was possible. Rin found herself drawn into these gatherings. At first, she only listened, shy and unsure. But soon, they began asking her questions. What was it like when he freed you? Did it feel real? Did it last? She answered softly but truthfully. It felt impossible, until it wasn't. It felt like breathing for the first time, and yes, it lasts. I'm still free. The way they looked at her then made her chest tighten. She was no longer just Rin, the unwanted girl from the auction. She was Rin, the proof. One evening, Elias watched her speaking to the group, his arms folded and a faint smile on his face. Later, as they walked back, she asked, "Why do they listen to me?" "Because your story is theirs," Elias replied. "You show them that even the smallest flame can light the dark." His words settled deep in her. For the first time, she began to believe she was more than a survivor. She was part of something greater, but not everyone was pleased. The slavers noticed the shift. Profits dropped, workers grew bolder. Whispers of defiance reached beyond the station, and they all traced back to one human and the alien girl who walked beside him. The slavers began to plot. Word count 1953, the slaver hall that had once been filled with laughter was quiet now. Cages sat empty, dust collecting on their bars. The auctioneer, the same one who had once called Rin Lot 47, paced nervously in the silence. His business was crumbling. Buyers no longer filled the seats. Rumors of humans freeing. Slaves had spread across the sector, and worse, slaves themselves were resisting. Whole shipments had been lost to uprisings. The very market that had made him powerful was slipping from his hands like sand through his claws. And at the center of it all, the whispers said, was a human, and the girl he had once sold for almost nothing. The auctioneer clenched his fists. He remembered her face, thin and hopeless. She had been worthless, unsellable. And yet somehow she had become the seed of his ruin. Meanwhile, far from the empty hall, Rin stood on a platform in a crowded station square. Not as a slave, but as a speaker. Hundreds of eyes were on her. Workers, freed slaves, traders, even some who had once doubted. Elias stood nearby, silent, letting her speak. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. I was nothing. I was unwanted. They said I had no worth. But a human looked at me and saw more. He bought me only to break my chains. He told me I was free. And now I stand here to tell you, so are you. Every chain can break, every cage can open. The crowd stirred. Murmurs turned into shouts, shouts into chants. Hope filled the air like fire spreading through dry wood. Elias watched with quiet pride. Rin, once too afraid to raise her voice, was now the heart of something greater. She was no longer proof only for herself, but for all who listened. But hope always drew enemies. Slavers tried to silence the gatherings. Guards were bribed to crack down on meetings. Threats appeared in the shadows. Yet every attempt only made the people angrier, bolder. One night, slavers came for Rin directly. A group of them waited in the docking bay, weapons ready, planning to drag her back as an example. But when they struck, they did not face only her and Elias. They faced dozens of workers, freed slaves, and even traders who had chosen to stand with them. The crowd pushed back, unarmed but united, refusing to let her be taken. Elias fought fiercely, every move precise and sharp. But it was the crowd that turned the tide. For every slaver, 5 voices shouted them down, 10 hands blocked their path. The slavers retreated, shaken not by force of arms but by force of will. Rin stood at the center, heart racing but standing tall. For the first time she realized Elias had been right all along. Humans did not simply fight for themselves, they taught others to fight, to believe, to stand. Word spread of the failed attack. More slaves rose up across nearby systems. Ships, once used for transporting chained cargo, were now crewed by those who had broken free. Slaver profits crashed. Whole markets closed, and always the story traveled with the movement. Of the human who had freed the unwanted girl, and the girl who became the voice of the freed. The auctioneer heard the stories too, each one like a nail in his coffin. The girl he had once tried to sell for scraps was now a name that echoed in the halls where chains had once ruled. Rin. Weeks later, Elias and Rin returned briefly to the very planet where it had all begun. They walked through the same streets, though now the air was different. The slaver banners were gone, torn down. The cages in the market square were empty, their locks broken. Rin paused at the spot where her collar had once fallen into the dust. She touched her bare neck and smiled faintly. Do you regret it? She asked Elias softly. Spending those credits on me? He chuckled. Not for a second. She turned to him, her eyes bright. You could not have known what would happen. Elias shrugged. Didn't need to know. Sometimes the right thing is enough. For a long moment they stood together in silence, watching the marketplace that had once been filled with chains now filled with free voices. Far away, the auctioneer sat alone in his office, his fortune gone. He thought of the human, of the girl, of the single choice that had started it all. She was worthless, he whispered bitterly. How could she ruin everything? But deep inside, he knew the truth. She had not been worthless. She had been the spark, and the human had lit the fire. That night, Rin stood on the ship's deck staring at the stars. They no longer looked cold and distant. They looked open, endless, waiting. Once, she had been Lot 47,